was a plant that once grew along the coast of North Africa. Just one plant. And for centuries it was more valuable than gold. Its image appeared on coins. Entire economies depended on it. Poets wrote about it. Doctors prescribed it. Lovers sought it. And then, one day, it was gone. Completely, as if it had never existed at all. Tonight, we're going to talk about Silphium. You've probably never heard of it, and that's the strange part. Because for the people of the ancient world, Silphium was everywhere. It flavored their food, healed their bodies, prevented pregnancies they didn't want, and made fortunes for those who controlled it. The city of Cyrene, in what is now Libya, built its entire wealth on this single plant. They put it on their money, they exported it across the Mediterranean, and the Romans, when they finally took control of that region, found themselves in possession of the most profitable plant on earth. But here's where the story gets interesting. Silphium didn't just fade away slowly, it vanished suddenly, completely, and mysteriously. The last stalk was reportedly given to the Emperor Nero as a curiosity, like showing someone the last passenger pigeon or the last woolly mammoth, and after that, nothing. Ancient writers mourned its loss. They wrote about how nothing could replace it, and for 2,000 years we've been trying to figure out what happened. Was it over-harvested into extinction by greedy merchants who couldn't see past the next sale? Did the climate shift and destroy its habitat? Or, and this is where things get conspiratorial, did it survive somewhere, hidden, its location kept secret by people who understood what they had? Tonight, we're going to walk through the evidence, the theories, and the strange feeling that sometimes, when something is too valuable, it becomes too dangerous to exist. So settle in, get comfortable, let your mind wander back through time to a coastline where a plant grew that would be worth billions today if we could find it again. This is a story about human nature, about what we do when we find something precious, and about the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the things we value most are the things we destroy fastest. If you're enjoying this quiet journey through history, and you think someone else might find peace in these stories too, feel free to share this with them. And if you'd like to help these explorations continue, a like or subscribe means more than you might think. Cyrene was not Rome. It was not Athens. It wasn't one of those cities whose names everyone recognizes. But for several centuries, Cyrene was wealthy beyond imagination, and that wealth came from one source. The city sat on the coast of Cyrenaica, a region in North Africa that enjoyed a specific climate. Not too hot, not too cold, enough rain but not too much. And in that narrow band of favorable conditions, Silphium grew wild. The plant itself was apparently tall, with thick stems and yellow flowers. Ancient descriptions suggest it looked something like giant fennel, with a strong, distinctive smell. But here's what made it special. Every part of the plant was useful. The roots could be cooked and eaten. The stems and leaves could be used as fodder for animals. The sap, called laser or laser-pythium, was the most valuable part. This resinous juice was harvested by cutting the stems and roots, and it had properties that the ancient world found miraculous. You could use it to flavor food. Roman recipes frequently called for laser, treating it the way we might treat an expensive spice today. It apparently added a savory, pungent taste that people loved. You could use it medicinally for dozens of different ailments. Ancient medical texts list silphium as a treatment for coughs, sore throats, fevers, indigestion, aches, pains, and even warts. Whether it actually worked for all these things is another question, but people believed it did, and that belief created demand. And then there was the most controversial use, birth control. Multiple ancient sources describe silphium as an effective contraceptive and abortifacient, which means a substance that could prevent pregnancy or end an early pregnancy. For women in the ancient world who had very few options for controlling their reproductive lives, this was extraordinarily valuable. We'll come back to this aspect later, because it might be key to understanding why silphium disappeared. Cyrene had what economists call a natural monopoly. Silphium apparently wouldn't grow anywhere else. People tried to cultivate it in other regions, according to ancient writers, and it either wouldn't take root or would grow into something different without the same properties. This meant Cyrene controlled the entire world's supply of a product that everyone wanted. Think about what that means economically. Cyrene could set whatever price it wanted, and it did. Silphium became expensive enough that the wealthy hoarded it, and the less wealthy could rarely afford it. The city became rich, magnificently rich. Its citizens built temples and theaters. They commissioned art. They lived well. And all because of a plant that happened to grow in their specific climate. The coins Cyrene minted show us how important silphium was to their identity. Many Cyrenaic coins feature the silphium plant prominently, sometimes showing the entire plant, sometimes just the seed pod, sometimes a woman sitting next to a silphium plant or touching it gently. These weren't generic decorative images. This was branding. This was Cyrene saying to the world, "We are the Silphium City, and this plant is our power." But monopolies create resentment. Other regions wanted silphium. Merchants wanted to break Cyrene's control. And when Rome eventually conquered Cyrenaica in 74 BCE, the silphium trade became a Roman concern. The Romans were practical people. They saw value and they exploited it. They took control of the harvest. They organized the export, and they continued to profit enormously from this strange plant that grew nowhere else on Earth. Here's where we have to be honest about the limits of our knowledge. We don't have silphium anymore. We can't analyze it chemically. We can't run controlled studies. We have descriptions from ancient writers, but ancient writers weren't always scientifically precise, and they sometimes exaggerated. So when we ask what made silphium so valuable, We're partly speculating based on what plants with similar descriptions might contain. The ancient physician Hippocrates mentioned silphium in his writings, suggesting specific medical applications. Dioscorides, whose medical text was used for over 1,000 years, described silphium and its uses in decale. Pliny the Elder, the Roman natural historian, wrote extensively about silphium, noting its value and lamenting that it had become incredibly rare by his time. These weren't fringe writers, these were respected authorities. Modern researchers have suggested that if silphium was related to plants like giant fennel or asafoetida, which some scholars believe based on descriptions and the fact that asafoetida was later used as a substitute, then it might have contained compounds called ferulic acid esters. These compounds can have real pharmacological effects. They can act as anti-inflammatories. They can affect digestion. Some compounds in related plants have been shown in modern studies to have effects on reproductive hormones. So it's plausible that silphium actually worked, at least for some of what it was claimed to do. That's important. If silphium had been useless, demand would have faded. The fact that demand remained high for centuries suggests that people experienced real benefits. Whether those benefits matched the extravagant claims is debatable, but something was happening that kept people coming back. This is delicate territory, but it's central to understanding silphium's value and possibly its disappearance. Ancient writers, including Cyrenus of Ephesus, who wrote extensively about gynecology and reproductive medicine, specifically described silphium as a contraceptive. Women were advised to take it in various forms, either drinking it mixed with liquid or using it in other applications to prevent pregnancy. In the ancient world, controlling fertility was dangerous business. Women had few legal rights in most societies. Unwanted pregnancies could mean death in childbirth, poverty, social disgrace, or being forced into marriages they didn't choose. Having access to an effective contraceptive would have been life-changing for women who could afford it. Modern scholars debate how effective silphium actually was. Some researchers point to related plants that do contain compounds affecting reproductive hormones. Studies on plants in the fennel family have identified substances that can influence estrogen levels and potentially affect fertility. It's not impossible that silphium had genuine contraceptive properties. But here's another angle, and it's darker. If silphium was an effective contraceptive, and if it was becoming rare, then certain groups might have had reasons to want it controlled or eliminated. Religious authorities who opposed birth control existed in the ancient world just as they do now. Political leaders who wanted growing populations for military and economic reasons might have seen widespread contraceptive use as a problem. We have no direct evidence of any conspiracy to eliminate silphium, but it's worth noting that a plant giving women reproductive control would have made powerful people uncomfortable. Ancient sources tell us that Silphium was difficult to cultivate. It grew wild, and attempts to farm it systematically apparently failed. This meant harvesters had to find wild plants, cut them for their sap, and hope more would grow. But there's a problem with that approach when demand is high and prices are extraordinary. Imagine you're a harvester in ancient Cyrenaica. You find a patch of Silphium. You could cut it carefully, taking only what you need, leaving the plant alive to grow more. Or you could rip it out entirely, roots and all, because the roots are valuable too, and someone else might find this patch tomorrow and take what you left behind. Which choice do you make? This is called the tragedy of the commons, though that term wouldn't be coined for another 2,000 years. When a valuable resource is accessible to multiple people and there's no effective enforcement of sustainable harvesting, individuals have an incentive to take as much as they can before someone else does, even if everyone would benefit from the resource lasting longer. The rational individual choice is to grab what you can now. The Romans, for all their organizational skill, apparently couldn't solve this problem with Silphium. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century CE, noted that Silphium had become extremely rare in his time and that the harvest had dwindled to almost nothing. He mentioned that the Silphium being sold in his era was often fake, substituted with inferior plants, because real Silphium was essentially unavailable. By the time of Emperor Nero, who reigned from 54 to 68 CE, Silphium was apparently extinct. The story goes that a single stalk of Silphium was brought to Nero as a marvel, the last known specimen, and after that, nothing. No more Silphium grew. The Romans, who had conquered the known world, who had built roads and aqueducts and systems of law that still influence us today, couldn't figure out how to keep one plant from disappearing. Not everyone believes over-harvesting was the only culprit. Some researchers have suggested that climate change, the natural kind that happens over centuries, might have destroyed Silphium's habitat. Plants can be surprisingly particular about their growing conditions. Change the temperature slightly, alter the rainfall pattern, shift the composition of the soil, and a plant that once thrived might suddenly fail. We know that the climate of North Africa has changed over millennia. Regions that were once more fertile have become more arid. The Sahara Desert has expanded and contracted over geological time. It's possible that during the period when Silphium was most valuable, the climate shifted just enough to make its narrow coastal habitat unsuitable. This theory has some appeal, because it explains why attempts to cultivate Silphium elsewhere failed. If the plant required very specific conditions that existed only in one small region, and those conditions changed, then Silphium would have disappeared, no matter how carefully people harvested it. Extinction wouldn't be humanity's fault in this scenario. It would just be bad timing. But here's the problem with letting ourselves off the hook. We know that the Romans harvested Silphium aggressively. We know that demand far exceeded supply. We know that by Pliny's time, people were already reporting that silphium had become rare because of over-harvesting. The climate might have been changing, but human behavior was definitely making things worse. Even if climate shift contributed to silphium's extinction, we can't pretend over-exploitation didn't play a major role. Now we get to the question that makes this story more than just a sad tale of extinction. What if silphium didn't actually go extinct? What if it survived and its location was kept secret by people who understood that revealing it would lead to the same destructive harvest that eliminated it before? There's no solid evidence for this theory, let's be clear about that, but there are some intriguing hints that keep the question alive. First, the ancient world was much larger than the regions the Romans controlled or even knew about in detail. Remote areas of North Africa, inland regions that didn't get much attention from classical writers, could theoretically have harbored silphium populations that no one recorded. Second, local populations in regions like Cyrenaica would have had knowledge that didn't make it into Greek or Roman texts. Indigenous people who lived in those areas for generations before the Greeks or Romans arrived might have known things about silphium that outsiders never learned. If some group decided that the best way to preserve silphium was to hide it and claim it had vanished, that wouldn't be unprecedented in human history. Third, there are plants alive today in the region where silphium grew that don't quite match anything in the ancient descriptions, but have some similar properties. Some researchers have suggested that plants like Ferula tingitana or other members of the Ferula genus might actually be descendants or relatives of silphium, perhaps changed over time or misidentified. If that's true, then silphium didn't go extinct. It just became unrecognizable to us. The conspiracy theory gets darker when you think about who might have benefited from silphium disappearing. If religious or political authorities wanted to limit access to effective birth control, making people believe silphium was extinct would achieve that goal. If you can't find it, you can't use it. Whether any group actually did this is unknown and probably unknowable, but the possibility adds a layer of intrigue to the story. People haven't given up looking for silphium. Over the past century, botanists and historians have searched North Africa for plants that might match the ancient descriptions. Some researchers have focused on the Ferula genus, which includes plants with similar characteristics to what ancient writers described. Others have explored remote regions, hoping to find isolated populations of a plant that might be silphium's descendant. In 2021, a Turkish researcher named Mahmud Miski claimed to have identified a plant called Ferula drudiala growing in Turkey that might be silphium or a very close relative. The plant grows in only one specific mountain region. It has similar properties to those described for silphium, and it's been used locally for purposes that match some of silphium's uses. The announcement generated excitement, but most scholars remain cautious. Proving that a modern plant is the same as an ancient one, based only on written descriptions is extremely difficult. What's interesting is that if we did find silphium or something very similar, it might not become the miracle commodity it once was. We have modern pharmaceuticals now. We have effective birth control developed through scientific research. We have flavorings and spices from around the world. Silphium's value in the ancient world came partly from scarcity and partly from lack of alternatives. In our world, even if silphium worked exactly as advertised, it might just be one more interesting plant among thousands. But the search continues because the story of silphium represents something larger. It's about loss. It's about what happens when we value something so highly that we consume it entirely. It's about wondering if we might get a second chance at something we thought was gone forever. There's a painful irony in Silphium's story. The plant was valuable because it was useful and rare. That value incentivized people to harvest it extensively. The more rare it became, the more valuable it got, which incentivized even more aggressive harvesting. The economic logic was clear at every step, but the end point was extinction. We see this pattern repeated throughout history. Passenger pigeons were hunted to extinction in North America, despite once existing in flocks that darkened the sky. Atlantic cod were fished to near extinction, despite being so plentiful that early explorers said you could practically walk across the ocean on their backs. Elephants have been slaughtered for ivory, rhinoceros for their horns, trees cut down until forests disappeared. The pattern is always the same. Something is valuable, so we take it, and we keep taking it until it's gone, even though keeping taking it guarantees we'll lose access to the very thing we valued. Silphium might be the earliest well-documented example of this pattern. The Romans knew it was becoming rare. Pliny wrote about it with concern. But knowing wasn't enough to change behavior. The economic incentives, the individual desires, the lack of effective conservation mechanisms, all combined to produce the outcome we might have predicted. The question that keeps philosophers and economists and conservationists up at night is whether this pattern is inevitable. Are humans simply incapable of managing resources sustainably when those resources are valuable enough? Or can we learn? Can we develop systems and cultural values that let us keep the things we cherish instead of destroying them? After Silphium disappeared, the ancient world tried to move on. Other plants were used as substitutes. Asafoetida, which comes from related plants and has a somewhat similar strong flavor, became the go-to replacement for culinary uses. Other herbs and medicines filled some of the gaps. Life continued, but the memory of Silphium persisted. Writers continued to mention it for centuries as an example of something precious that had been lost. The coins from Cyrene
with their Silphium images became historical curiosities. People looking at those coins knew they were seeing a plant that no longer existed, and that knowledge must have felt strange, like looking at pictures of extinct animals, but worse somehow, because this was something humans had actively used up. There's a melancholy in reading ancient texts that mention Silphium casually, as just another ingredient or medicine, written before anyone realized it would disappear. Those writers had no idea they were documenting something temporary. They assumed Silphium would always be available, maybe expensive, but available. They were wrong. That same assumption exists today for countless things we take for granted. We assume certain foods will always be in stores, certain medicines will always exist, certain resources will always be accessible, but ecosystems are collapsing, species are vanishing, climate change is altering what can grow where. Some of the things we assume are permanent might be gone within our lifetimes, and future people might look back at our casual mentions of them the way we look at ancient texts about Silphium.
There's something uniquely sad about extinction. It's not like other kinds of loss, where there's a possibility of recovery or replacement. When a species goes extinct, or when a unique variety of plant disappears, that's permanent. That particular combination of genes, that specific organism shaped by millions of years of evolution, is gone. You can't bring it back. You can't find another one somewhere else. It's simply over. With Silphium, we lost more than just a plant. We lost knowledge. We lost the accumulated wisdom of generations of people who knew how to use it, how to prepare it, what it was good for. We lost potential medical discoveries. Maybe Silphium contained compounds we still haven't synthesized, medicines we still haven't developed.
Maybe studying its genetics could have taught us things about plant adaptation, or drought resistance, or medicinal chemistry. We'll never know now. And there's a personal dimension too. Think about the last person who harvested the last Silphium plant. Did they know? Did they realize they were ending something? Or did they assume there would be more next season, that someone else would find another patch, that Silphium would always grow somewhere, even if it was getting harder to find? What would it feel like to discover you had destroyed something irreplaceable without meaning to?
Here's what strikes me about this story. Lying here in the dark, thinking about a plant that vanished 2,000 years ago. The people who valued Silphium weren't different from us. They wanted to heal their illnesses. They wanted to control their reproductive choices. They wanted good food. They wanted to make money. They were human in exactly the ways we're human. And they made the same mistakes we make. They thought about short-term gain over long-term sustainability. They assumed something would always be available, right up until it wasn't. They knew what they were doing was probably unsustainable, but they did it anyway, because stopping would have required sacrifice.
And humans aren't good at sacrifice when the consequences feel distant or abstract. Silphium's extinction should have taught us something. Maybe it did teach some people something, but clearly not enough people, or not powerfully enough, because we've repeated the pattern over and over. We're still doing it right now with countless species and ecosystems. But tonight isn't about guilt or despair. It's about connection. You're lying here thinking about this plant, this mystery, this loss. You're connected to everyone across history who has wondered about Silphium, who has mourned its disappearance, who has hoped maybe somewhere it still grows. You're connected to the ancient people who valued it so highly. You're connected to the Romans who watched it vanish. You're connected to modern researchers still searching for it. That connection across time, that shared human experience of wondering and hoping, and sometimes losing things we value, that's real. That's something Silphium gave us even in its absence. A story that reminds us we're part of something larger than ourselves. A human story that stretches back millennia and continues forward into a future we can't fully see.
So, did Silphium really go extinct? Or is it out there somewhere, hidden in a remote valley, or growing unrecognized under a different name? We might never know for certain. The evidence is too fragmentary, the time gap too large, the original plant gone too long for us to be absolutely sure. But maybe that uncertainty is fitting. Maybe some mysteries are meant to stay mysterious. Maybe some questions are more valuable for what they make us think about than for any answer we might find. If someone discovered Silphium tomorrow, proved definitively that they'd found it, what would we do?
Would we carefully preserve it, learning from history's lesson? Or would we immediately start trying to figure out how to exploit it commercially, how to patent its compounds, how to profit from it? Would we be any different from the Romans, who couldn't save it the first time? I'd like to think we would be different. I'd like to think we've learnt something in 2,000 years. But I'm not entirely sure. And that uncertainty makes the story of Silphium feel very present, very relevant, very much about us, and not just about ancient history. As you drift towards sleep tonight, imagine that coastal region of North Africa in the ancient world. Imagine the plant growing wild, tall stems swaying in the Mediterranean breeze, yellow flowers bright against the sky. Imagine the people who found it, who learned its uses, who built an economy on its value. Imagine the last plant, whether it went to Nero or died unnoticed somewhere in the hills. Imagine all the things we've lost that we don't even know we've lost. All the plants and animals and knowledge that disappeared before anyone thought to write it down. All the possibilities that vanished before we even recognized them as possibilities. And imagine, just for a moment, that somewhere Silphium still grows, hidden
waiting. Protected by people who learn the lesson history tried to teach us. It's probably not true. It's probably just a pleasant fantasy. But in the space between waking and sleeping, it's okay to hope for things we'll probably never see. You're connected to this story now. You carry it with you. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the act of remembering, of wondering, of caring about something that vanished so long ago, maybe that itself is valuable. Maybe that's how we honor what was lost and try to do better with what we still have. Sleep well. Dream of hidden plants and ancient mysteries. Dream of a world where valuable things are protected rather than consumed. Dream of second chances for what we thought was gone forever. Good night, soft dreams, and thank you for taking this quiet journey through time with me.